Good afternoon, everyone. We're so pleased that everyone could join us virtually for today's session on social media for researchers. My name is Heather Persson, and I'm the Director of Research Profile and Impact at the University of Saskatchewan. And as we gather here today, we acknowledge we are on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place, and we reaffirm our relationship with one another. I just want to thank everyone on behalf of the Saskatchewan Health Research Foundation and the Research Profile and Impact Office at the University of Saskatchewan, because we're co-sponsoring the event today. And I do want to let everyone know that the session is being recorded. So we have so many people who have reached out that said, I can't come, but I need that information. So we're going to work to make that available. So I took over my role in January. My background is I was the editor-in-chief of the Star Phoenix and the Leader Post. So I come from the media landscape, and I certainly saw how social media can be a blessing and a curse, but it's a tool that we need to know how to use. And my job now is to make sure that researchers can tell their stories. So it's very important that we give you information, and that's what today's session is all about. We want to help you get through those sometimes rough waters of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, so you can tell your story very well. So I think we're just going to jump right in with some introductions. So we have Nikki Desjardins, who is the Communications and Outreach Officer at the Saskatchewan Health Foundation, and she's been my partner in planning today's event. She's also made me feel very welcome in this territory of research communications. So special thanks to her at this opportunity. So she's been with SHRF for more than 5 years, guiding the promotion and understanding of the work funded by her organization. And she worked in the past with Saskatoon Public Library in the city of Saskatoon. She's here to give the perspective of the funder, which we don't always get. Chris Morin is a communication specialist news at the University of Saskatchewan, and he's really the catalyst and cornerstone of our social media strategy. He's a leader also in the Saskatchewan arts community and a musician. We actually work together at the Star Phoenix, and I'm so glad to get to work with such a creative and innovative person again. And we have Dr. Angela Rasmussen. She's a virologist studying, as she calls it, the endlessly fascinating struggle between host and the pathogen. She uses a combination of classical virological techniques and systems biology to study the host response to viral infection and how it causes disease. She's trained in institutions like Columbia and the University of Washington, and most recently, she's arrived at VIDO at USask to lend her expertise, and we're so glad she's here. I would call her a warrior on social media, so we're really glad to have her expertise and insights here today. We've got lots of ground to cover, but I think we're going to start off with a poll. So I'm just going to launch this. So we're going to ask which social media platforms you use the most. So I think, can everyone see that? Great. Oh, okay. Facebook is an early leader. Right, Twitter. Okay, I'll maybe just give it a couple more seconds. All right. So Facebook was the winner at 66%, Instagram and Twitter both up there, and YouTube at 39. LinkedIn at 32. That's been one I've been more engaged with in this role. Very interesting. Thank you. So actually, we're going to start with Chris Morin. He has a presentation on some tips and insights. So we're going to turn it over to Chris for a few moments.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Heather. Basically, I think you've already given me the rundown of what I do, so I won't waste too much time on that. But I've been in this role for around roughly 5 years at USask. I've been fortunate enough to work with the School of Environment and Sustainability, as well as the Global Institute for Water Security. And I was also involved in a few early meetings with Global Water Futures. So lots of interesting things that go on here and that I've been able to see kind of the back end of as well. And yeah, as Heather mentioned, journalist, web producer for the Star Phoenix. So that means I've kind of seen the other side of, I guess, what goes on at USask, kind of sifting through what I see, looking for those big stories and looking for things to share. Yeah, so I'm just going to launch into my slideshow presentation here. All right, hopefully everyone's seeing what I'm seeing. Thumbs up. All right, so yeah, basically a big part of what we do here and what I do here at USask is storytelling. So that means putting together news stories, putting together videos, putting together all the images of what I do. We have a really big channel in terms of sharing those stories, and that's news.usask.ca. That's where a lot of our really important stuff comes out, whether it's research, whether it's student success stories, etc. And basically, a lot of what happens there gets distilled down into our social media channels. And again, a big part of what I do, not just storytelling, but story sharing. So figuring out a way to get those stories that our talented people put together, because there's obviously not one person doing it. There's so many people who are out there working hard to share the stories of our researchers, of our people, staff and faculty. And obviously social media is a big part of what we do here. So just wanted to give a really quick rundown of sort of the 4 main channels. I know there's a few that are missing from this list here. That doesn't mean to say that they're not important. It's just not going to run through them as much because we have a ton of things to run through and I want to keep this as short as possible. But just to give you a quick little rundown of what some of what I do here, some of what I see, etc. So I just want to give a really, really quick rundown of our social media accounts. They have a wide variety of followers and they all have a very specific, I guess, audience. So when you're posting to one or the other, you kind of got to keep these things in mind, where you're trying to reach certain people. And like I said, these channels all have a massive following. From our Twitter, which has almost 40,000, Facebook, which is almost at 60,000, and surprisingly, our LinkedIn has over 100,000 followers. So, it's interesting when people say that LinkedIn is maybe not their favorite, but we have a ton of people engaging in our stories there. So it's always really interesting to see kind of where those people are, what they're clicking on, what they're maybe commenting on, and just kind of all the differences that we're seeing with the different platforms. And I guess one thing to keep in mind too with our different audiences, we have a lot of students following us, but we also have a lot of external agencies as well. So I'll get to that as well, but that's government, it's academic, it's media, it's funders, etc. So just trying to find out where to follow those people. It always takes a little bit of research when you're digging in, when you're trying to create your posts. It's something I always try and do as well. If we have an important funding announcement, it's maybe looking up to see who's funding it, what hashtags they're using, etc. So basically, I just want to give a few social media tips. These are all anecdotal, so take them how you will. But I think what we're going to do here is I'll just maybe give these and hopefully it'll create some lively discussion and some lively questions for us all later. So I'm trying to keep things a little bit general here in terms of the platform, but hopefully these things kind of all apply for everything that we use and hopefully for what you're going to use as well. So basically be bold, be brave, be authentic. I think when I see posts that are being made by researchers, the ones that do really well are the ones where our researchers or whoever, they basically use their true selves on social media. That can be a little bit of a leap of faith, a leap of bravery, maybe to put yourself out there and, to kind of use that really authentic voice that you have, that you alone have in terms of sharing your work or your life, really. I mean, they're pretty much interchangeable at this point, especially on social media. And people do all the time. They share their lives, they share their work. And yeah, it's always a really interesting thing to see when you're putting yourself out there, how you present that work. And, like I said, I can say that, when you're using your own voice, that's what really gets people engaged. It's what gets them excited. And it makes them want to share what you do as well. They can feel that excitement. And, obviously running an institutional account, I mean, I'm posting on behalf of USask essentially, but I guess, if you're a researcher, you're kind of posting on behalf of yourself. So it makes it maybe a little bit more interesting almost in terms of what USask does versus what you can do. It takes a little bit of time to figure out, who you are, but I mean, who you are, so we don't need to get into that. But yeah, I mean, you have the means to tell your story, and no matter what you do, it'll be interesting. One of the things that I would always tell people is to prepare for success. It's not preparing for everything else. It's preparing for the fact that you might hit a nerve with people, you might connect. And when that happens, people are going to be knocking on your door, whether it's virtually, whether it's IRL, hopefully not our IRL at this point. But I think when you're putting yourself out there, you're putting your work out there on social media, there's so many questions that are going to happen from that, and I've seen it all the time. For example, with some of the USask water testing, testing for COVID in the wastewater, there's people are interested. They want to know more, and people will reach out, and if you're prepared with those questions, people are going to be engaged with what you have to say even more. They're going to want to share that even more. So, just again, being prepared for, people following you, for sharing your work. It'll help definitely things in the long run. And like I said, there's so many things to tell about your story. Another quick little tip I've got, hashtags, adding accounts, funders, agencies, adding links, etc. What more is there to say about this? I mean, this is pretty much the 101 of it, but, using even like the hashtag USask, it helps us find what you're posting out there. It helps us share it. Same with anybody else that maybe you're going to hashtag or that you're going to @, whether it's a funder, an agency, etc. One of the things that we try and do is, for example, if we're sharing one of VIDO's success stories, we try and @ them as well. So, they're aware of us posting, that they can share it as easily as possible. Not every platform these things aren't always true to every platform. So again, you kind of have to give you have to do a little bit of research, when you're about to write your post, but, putting in even that 2-5 minutes, whatever it takes, definitely will make things smoother. And, again, it's just a matter of Google. I mean, Google is your friend here, and it'll help you find those accounts that maybe you need to help tag into your post to help share your stories. And the other number one thing I always try and tell people is visuals are half of your story. It's basically, I know a lot of research, it can be very wordy. It can be it can't always be distilled down into like a sentence or two, or even, a 500-word essay, etc. News article. I mean, there's so much to tell, but having those visuals is a really big part of how you're going to grab people's attention, how you're going to, keep them maybe engaged a little bit more. I've seen people do this with infographics, with graphs, charts, etc. Even having photos lined up for anything that you're going to be posting. I mean, these are all part of telling your story. Not everyone's a graphic designer, obviously, but just having something there that will help grab that attention. It really, really makes a huge difference to any of your posts. And I just wanted to throw out a couple of quick examples here. Here's some from our wonderful VIDO community. Some of the people that are putting out, those authentic voices. I read these posts and it's just, it almost makes me smile, as I'm working here, just seeing what they're doing, how they're sharing those stories and getting them out there. And, they are being shared. People are interested in what we're doing right now because of obviously what's happening in the world. But, this could be anybody really, putting out those hashtags, tagging those agencies, etc., getting those links out there. Again, these are all great examples of some of the things that our community are doing. And I just want to throw out another one here. So this is another interesting sort of, I guess, a 101 here. So Marcus is one of our USask water researchers. The wastewater that I was talking about earlier. Again, getting those visuals out there. How do you show wastewater? Well, you maybe don't, but they found a way around that to show these really interesting visuals, whether it's a snappy photograph, whether it's a quick little graphic, it's still having those visuals for maybe something that there isn't a visual for. And all these things make it really easy for us to share these stories and for anyone else really to share these stories. I bring up Marcus because, when the wastewater surveillance got launched, I saw a lot of people really, really interested in this story, like immediately. And I think Marcus did a really good job of sharing those stories, as well as we could share those stories as well. And, getting those stories out in the media, et cetera. And, drumming up more interest, as the stories are coming back to us, we're sharing them again. And it kind of snowballs and, brings even more light to that research. So that's a quick little 101 that I have here. Right. And yeah, I think
Thanks so much, Chris.
Absolutely.
I think the idea of creating conversation around your work and building community are two really powerful things that can happen from social media. So thank you so much, Chris, for that. We're just going to go to some of our other panelists and ask some questions, and then already some questions coming in the chat. So that's a very good sign. So Dr. Rasmussen, maybe we'll start with you. You have more than 220,000 followers on Twitter. Maybe you can just summarize your approach to social media and why is it useful?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, nobody is more surprised by the size of my Twitter following than I am. But I realized as Chris was talking that some of the tips that he was giving are all things that I've done. And really my central principle for Twitter is I've never phrased it as, be bold, be brave, be authentic. But I think that really does kind of sum up my ethics about it and how I think about it. I started doing Twitter. I've had a Twitter account since 2011, but I didn't really use it very much prior to the pandemic. And when the pandemic first started, I was at Columbia in a faculty position there, but my family lived in Seattle. So I was in the process of commuting between New York and Seattle. And then Columbia closed down. I decided that I would rather spend the pandemic with my family rather than by myself in my New York apartment. So I was pretty much stuck in Seattle. I couldn't do anything. The school was closed anyways. I couldn't help out as a virologist, which is how I'm trained. So I thought one thing I could do, since I'm reading all of these SARS coronavirus 2 papers anyways, is I can start tweeting about it and helping people wrap their heads around it, because I did see a lot of stuff in the media about some of these preprints that, especially early on, were really not of very good quality. And yet they were being reported really hyperbolically, and people were frankly getting scared. So I kind of got into it through that, like just trying to help people understand. And then as it's gone on, and of course, I'm American and our pandemic response was not great. I somewhat lost my temper probably around May or June of 2020 and started really speaking my mind and being pretty critical, particularly of some of the decisions that were made in terms of the US pandemic response. And I think that that sort of attracted a whole nother group of followers, also because I was being very forthright and candid. So, people were coming to me already for science content as a reliable source who can talk about viruses, because I've been working on coronaviruses since 2013 when MERS coronavirus first emerged. But also to try to help, I think, put the pandemic into context, and also because I showed these flashes of humanity. So I think that, Chris, for me, it's really important that if people are reading my social media content, they should learn something from it. They should get an answer to their questions that they have. And it's also been a great opportunity to showcase the excellent work of some of my colleagues. And now that I'm here at the university and at VIDO, there's so much amazing work that's happening here around me. I feel like I'm really fortunate to have a lot of great content in what my colleagues are doing. And it's also really helped me build collaborative relationships. One of the greatest things about the pandemic, not that it's great, but one of the silver linings, I think, is just the fact that I have met so many other virologists, and as well as people in adjacent fields to mine. So epidemiologists, immunologists, physicians, public health policymakers, all of the above. And I'm really, very, very privileged, I think, to have a platform that allows me to come here and have so many great colleagues that I can promote and, ultimately facilitate doing great work going forward with my new colleagues here, as well as my colleagues in the US and around the world that I've really been able to connect with through social media. So even though, Twitter can be a pretty unpleasant place sometimes, I think that the net good that's come out of it for me as a scientist, and as a scientist who's part of a larger academic community, has been really, really wonderful. And I encourage people to really just do what Chris advised, to be yourself, to share your opinion, to showcase your own work if you're doing research here. And you don't have to be the PI of the lab either, or the professor. Students, I think, have a really important voice. People who are training have a really important voice. It's also a great place to discuss issues that not everybody's aware of, issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example. It's a really important place to have some of these discussions, since we can't really have them in person, and we haven't been able to for a long time. It's a great way, I think, to bring these issues to the forefront of people's minds and to allow your voice to be heard.
That's great. Just as a follow-up around, and I've been dying to ask you this question, because some of the trolls that have come after you, I've been, wanting to track them down and, deal with them, because it's seeing another woman attacked in the way that sometimes women are in that space in that particular way. But how do you filter that? How do you respond when you are dealing with some of the unpleasantness that I think especially Twitter can afford?
So it's a great question. And I don't think there's any one right way to do it. I'm going to preface this by saying that I think that everybody has their own comfort level and tolerance with that. And for me, it really depends on what kind of troll it is. If it's an account that to me appears to be a fake account for the purpose of trolling, I'm just going to block that account instantly. if it's an account that has a lot of followers, or if it's in some cases an account that has a lot of fans, and this really happened last summer when I got into a Twitter argument with Elon Musk, who has over, at the time, I think he had 37 million followers, about the COVID data in the US. And he was claiming that essentially the pandemic was over because he was looking at national averages and misinterpreting them. You know, I had a lot of Elon Musk's fans coming into my replies, so I would block them, but I didn't block Elon Musk, because in that case, probably that would have potentially been a bad thing. Elon Musk would have then made a big deal out of the fact that I blocked him, and that would have sent even more people my way. On the other hand, you know, I've had people who also have large followings deliberately try to pick fights with me. Alex Berenson, who is an anti-vaccine and anti-mask advocate in the US, has done this. Those people I will block liberally, because I think also, and you know, it's always brought up, people love to post a screenshot then that shows that you blocked them. But I think that anybody, you know, especially women, have the right to use these platforms in whichever way they want. And if people want to use these platforms to abuse and harass you, the purpose of trolling is not to embarrass you, it's to silence you. Those people don't deserve space in your head. And that really is my philosophy. Other people don't always, they're not as quick to block as I am. But I think that sometimes when you can tell that somebody's not dealing with you in good faith, that means that you can choose to opt out of dealing with them at all. And so that really is how I deal with a lot of that. But sometimes it can be trickier. So I've written a couple pieces for the New York Times and other national publications in the US about vaccination. And sometimes I get people who are obviously anti-vaccine trolls responding to that. Sometimes though, I get people who have questions about vaccines and have heard things, usually on social media, that they're repeating, and that they might not actually be trying to troll me. So sometimes it can be difficult to try to sort through somebody who's just misinformed and somebody who has outright bad intentions. In those situations, if they're not being abusive towards me, I'll try to engage with them in good faith and answer questions, especially about an important topic like vaccination. But when it starts becoming abusive or personally attacking me, that's when I just say, you know what, I might respond so that everybody can see my response. But you know, I'm just like not going to waste any more of my time with that, because I'm also just personally just moved to Canada, and everybody here has been wonderful and so welcoming in Saskatoon. I'm in the midst of, though, of buying a house and like all these other personal things, trying to get my lab off the ground. So I don't have time to spend all day in the replies on Twitter trying to sort through who's trying to engage me in good faith and who's not. So it's an imperfect system. I think that everybody though should experiment and see what's right for them.
Yeah, I really like what you said about finding your own comfort level. I know when I was back in my media days, the journalists really are the target of trolls and harassment at times, and it was working with each of them. Sometimes you need a break. Sometimes you just have to decide how you're going to engage and find your comfort level. I think that grows with comfort. Maybe that was the case for you, that your comfort grows as you work in the different platforms and find your level in them.
Yeah, there are some days when I'm just like, you know what, no more, this is not good for me, and I just turn off Twitter and go do something else. I'll hang out with my dog, hang out with my husband, play some video games, take a walk, whatever. I think that it is really important not to sort of drown in social media, especially if you're having a really bad day. Especially for women, you know, I have a pretty thick skin, but if you hear over and over again that you're ugly or fat or stupid or old, it does wear on you, even though you know that it's not true, and that you expect to hear things like this, especially if you're commenting on a controversial topic. I think that it's totally fine to take a day off, to take a week off, to take a month off, to delete your Twitter account if you want. I think that it really just, you should prioritize yourself and self-care over all else in terms of social media. And that does make it a lot easier to manage.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. I've been dying to ask you those questions, so that's terrific. Nikki, I'm wondering if I can turn to you for a moment. I think researchers are very interested in how funding agencies pay attention to social media. Do you care with a thank you, or do you want to be tweeted at? How can researchers use the platforms to communicate with funders and thanking them for those grants and the support for their work?
Yeah, thanks very much. Happy to be here today and provide a little bit of that perspective. So yes, as a funder, we definitely pay attention to all the social media channels. We actually actively use it to engage our audiences, and we have a lot of varied audiences that we are trying to communicate with. So that includes the research community themselves, but also partners and potential partners, and even government stakeholders. So we have different things that we're trying to target to those audiences. We want our researchers to know about our opportunities, about results, their colleagues, their successes, things like that. We want partners to know that they can work with us and the different ways that we do that. And we want the government agencies and other stakeholders like the government to know that the money we're investing is having an impact on the province. So that itself is really where the researchers can help the funder. Those mentions and sharing the work and recognizing the funders that have supported that work really help us to go back to our varied audiences and say, this is helping and this is the impact that it's having. It helps us put a bit of a face to the research that's happening in the province as well, because the work that is being done is impacting the people of Saskatchewan, but the people that are doing it are just as important. They're the expertise, and they're the people that we can call on to help inform some of the decision making that happens in the province. So really highlighting those stories and recognizing your funder brings our attention to it. Like Chris mentioned, giving us a quick mention or using some of our hashtags, that helps us find the content that we can then share and amplify the messaging, which in turn really helps us because we're trying to say we're relevant, we're investing in quality, relevant research for the province. So work with us, invest in us more so that we can then turn around and invest in the research community. So it's a mutually beneficial thing. When you're thanking your funders, you're actually bringing attention to others that say, this is a good place to invest your money because they're really supporting local research.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to ask this of all the panelists, and maybe I'll start with Chris as a starter, but can you showed some of some successful posts to us, but can you think of a post that you created that really helped build audience and was successful, and sort of what the lessons were in that for you? I don't think I put this in the pre-notes, so sorry, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
No worries. You know, I mean, it's always helpful when there's multiple things to post about, you know, that it's not just one thing. And, you know, because our audiences are so broad and varied, you know, it gets really hard to try to dig into like one story, you know, but when we have like those really cool quotes, you know, like those really simple, but like strong hitting quotes, you know, those always help so much, you know, when we're helping to share that story because we're directly sharing that researcher story that way. So yeah, you know, having those quotes and, you know, a variety of sources to share, you know, not just USask, but, you know, if there's other media stories as well. So, you know, there's so many that I can't think of one, but, you know, that jumps out at me right away, just having those strong quotes.
That's a great tip. Nikki, can you think of a post or even, you know, just an approach that really worked and helped build audience?
Yeah, so I think in terms of what SHRF does, we've found our most success And Chris kind of mentioned it as well, but those posts with visuals, with links, or with videos, and short videos that are really descriptive of the work, but in a nice, concise way that's really approachable and you know, accessible to a broad audience. Those are the posts that seem to do the best. It's taking that really complicated research and making it something that everybody can understand, and it's visual and it's shareable, and those seem to be the best. But also, I guess anytime that we're involved with partners, or we mention researchers or research groups that also have a presence on the social media channel that we're on, those do a million times better than when we just post something that's our own and you know, don't have that engaging factor. When you actually can mention somebody and build that audience that way, you're reaching your audience plus their audience, and that's always very successful.
That's great. Dr. Rasmussen, you mentioned the Elon Musk exchange. Are there any other posts that you built that come to mind as successful? Might be some lessons to be learned.
Yeah, so even though the Elon Musk tweet and series of tweets got a lot of attention, I wouldn't really call that a success. And unfortunately, one thing people do need to keep in mind is that at least the Twitter algorithm tends to reward posts that can be controversial, or that can be somewhat antagonistic. And so I've certainly had successful tweets that have been really me expressing my own opinion, and usually that's frustration. I had another tweet that got over 10,000 likes and retweets, in which I used some colorful language to describe the former president of the United States. You know, that is not really my goal, though. I mean, I think that is authentically who I am. I think people do appreciate having some insight into what I personally believe and think about things. But scientifically, in terms of my professional communications, that's not what I would regard as success. What I regard as a success is something where I feel like I've informed people and helped them to understand a complex issue. And I can give you a good example. I was woken up on, I think it was April 13th, with a bunch of texts at 5 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, saying that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had been paused because of these blood clotting issues that had been reported. And I had received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine on April 5th. And even though I'm not exactly a spring chicken, I'm also not 50. I'm younger than that. So I was right in the window of risk and right in the age group that is thought to be most at risk, being that I'm a woman. So, you know, my first thought was, okay, let's do a little risk analysis. And I was, you know, just back of the envelope, some numbers. You know, you can debate whether these numbers are really comparable or not, but you know, the risk of blood clots are much higher for a whole bunch of other things, including oral contraceptives and flying and smoking, and actually COVID-19. So I tweeted that sort of back of the envelope 1 in a million number for Johnson & Johnson, even though it seems like it's probably more frequent than that. It's still a very rare side effect. And obviously I have not had a serious blood clot from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so that was something that I think I muted it because I was getting so many replies and retweets, but the last I checked, it had over 20,000 retweets. And people have reached out to me to tell me that was helpful in terms of them being able to assess their own risk because they had just gotten the Johnson & Johnson shot. It led to me writing a piece in the New York Times in which I elaborated on how I did that risk assessment. And overall, the feedback I've gotten has been overwhelmingly positive in terms of helping people, you know, understand like what their risk actually is, what they should look out for if they did get the Johnson & Johnson shot, whether they should get Johnson & Johnson or, now that I'm here, AstraZeneca going forward. So that was an example of something I think that addressed concerns that immediately went into people's minds when they heard that news about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And I think that's why it was successful. And that is something that I'm certainly more proud of than swearing at President Trump in terms of, you know, the impact that it had on my audience.
Thank you so much. I think that whole aspect of not just sharing data or what happened or that kind of thing, but really touching on why should we care? Why should my audience care? Why should my colleagues care? It's a question I think even in my short time here that people are sick of me asking them. It's like, why should the audience care about this? I also talk about the absolute just mountain of information coming at us through social media all the time. There needs to be something, whether it's an image or that quote or that impactful statement, really that authentic emotion can also cut through the noise of social media as well. So from my media days, I was always talking to my staff about the sharp stick, that there needs to be something that will poke people and wake them up and get their attention. That might be a little harsh in the world of research maybe, but I don't think it's necessarily too far off, that there needs to be something that stands out. And if you work at it, you'll find your voice and you'll find what works for you in that context. So thank you so much. We have a question from, we're just going to ask people to please put your questions in the chat if you have any for our panelists. And we have one that I'm excited to share and I thought would come up. And that is, what are some of the conflicts of interest a student or a researcher who's posting on social media can expect? So how do you balance between the personal brand and the institutional needs? And you know, Chris talked about this, that there's going to be a little bit different voice and being careful and everyone needs to be thinking about reputational risk when they're on social media. It's something to be very aware of. So maybe we'll just start with Chris. Do you have any tips or thoughts on balancing that personal brand versus the institutional needs that you're connected with?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, obviously with USask, I mean, we don't delve too much into anyone's personal lives, you know, whether they, you know, they're posting something on Twitter or not, you know, our researchers. I mean, there's so many people out there that are adding to, you know, whatever their noise is, that, you know, we really try and pay attention to the research itself. You know, but I mean, basically, I think it's just a lot of, you know, just like you said, just kind of handling yourself in a professional manner. You know, if something doesn't feel right, you know, maybe sleep on it. You know, people delete things off social media all the time, you know, for better or for worse. Part of the thing you have to keep in mind now is that people screenshot things all the time. So even if that thing is off your timeline, it maybe still exists somewhere else. So it's just, you know, all these things are just something to keep in mind as you're posting things. You know, obviously, you know, you don't want to post things that are just unnecessarily provoking people, or maybe you do, I don't know. But, you know, I think it's just kind of a, yeah, I don't know. It's just, I think something that'll come naturally to you that, you know, if you don't say, it's not something like you would come into your office and like say a bunch of really provocative things suddenly, you know, things that you maybe couldn't take back. So maybe use that sort of same line of thinking with Twitter or, you know, wherever else you're posting.
You're muted, Heather.
Thank you. I knew I was going to do that once at least. Do you have any thoughts on how to balance off, you know, your personal opinions versus being connected to an institution?
Yeah, this is something that's always going to be a work in progress for me, because especially now that I do have a larger following, when I started out and I had 250 Twitter followers, it didn't really matter very much what I said. But, you know, I try in general not to personally attack people. I can be very sharply critical, but I tend not to attack them as a human being. I will criticize, sometimes sharply, behavior that they engage in, their conduct, in some cases for leaders, their policy decisions. But I try not to attack other people personally. And I think I generally do a pretty good job of that. Although the discourse on Twitter seems to be that if you disagree with anybody, you're attacking them personally. So sometimes these discussions can be somewhat distorted, but in general, I try to, conduct myself in a way that won't result in me getting pulled into a boss's office, having to explain myself. I also am really conscious of not getting too far afield from my own area of expertise. And that's something that is a mistake that I've seen a lot of colleagues make, where somebody might have a great deal of expertise in epidemiology, for example, and all of a sudden now they're talking about variants and mutations and things that they don't actually have a lot of deep knowledge about. Similarly, I'm not going to go on the news and talk about this or that epidemiological model predicting the pandemic's trajectory, because that's not what I do. So I think that people really should be aware that it's okay to stick to what you know. It's certainly okay to have opinions about other things that you're not an expert on, but I really strongly suggest that people don't present themselves as being an expert in everything. It's okay to have specialized knowledge, and it's also okay to publicly say, I don't know, given the nature of science, which one could argue that a good scientist is always trying to prove or disprove their hypotheses. There's also no shame in saying publicly, you know what, I thought this before. My opinion has changed with the data and I was wrong. And if you were a jerk about it, you can say sorry too. But it's also okay to change your opinion and change your beliefs. And people will criticize you for that, because I get criticized for it all the time. But I think it's really great skills for people to have, especially if they're trying to cultivate a bigger following. Have humility and be true to yourself, but don't overextend yourself to areas where you're not as comfortable.
Great advice. Thank you. Nikki, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think just kind of building on what both of the other panelists have said is just that authenticity. Think about your audience and why they began to follow you in the first place. And think of it, I mean, social media is not that different from speaking to your neighbor on the corner of the street or someone you're running into at the grocery store. It's the same, it's a different platform, but just remembering it's just another form of communication. So keeping those ideas of authenticity and transparency and being open about why you're there and what you're trying to do with your social media accounts is really key, because it's just a new way for us to communicate with other humans. So it's okay to show that you're human.
I like that a lot. I think that making sure it's easy to forget that you're in relationship with people on social media, but you really are. We had a columnist at the Star Phoenix who passed away, and one of the people that gave a eulogy was a Twitter friend, and it had formed this real connection, and I'll never forget that. And that informs sometimes what I do on social media, is that people have real feelings, and you have a relationship with your employer too. So it's always good just to keep those relationships in mind and prioritize them, even though it's very easy to get caught up in things sometimes. So that would be my piece of advice on that too, is that just honor that relationship. And if you wouldn't put what's in a tweet up on a billboard so everyone driving around could see it, you probably shouldn't put it on social media either. Oh, that's great. So we have another question. How do you choose a name to post under, and should you use your real name? Interesting. Dr. Rasmussen, can you maybe take a crack at that one?
I think it depends on your reason for being on social media. For me, I initially started my Twitter account because I thought that when I was a postdoc, that it would be a good place for me to share my publications. At that time, I had even fewer than 100 followers, so it wasn't a really good place for that, just because nobody was really seeing them. But if that's the case, if you want to do it to promote your professional profile, to promote your academic work, then definitely you should do it under your real name. If you want to be verified, which is, I am verified, it's not something I actually wanted, but one of the criteria for verification also is that they can verify your identity. And say that basically you are who you say you are, at least on Twitter. But if you just want to be able to say, look at some people's tweets and interact with people in a particular community, and remain anonymous, that's completely fine. And I know several people who are, either they work for companies, or one virologist I know is at Hong Kong University, and they are also involved in pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. So they use a pseudonym for that reason. There's a lot of valid reasons, I think, to have an anonymous Twitter account. I would discourage people from setting up anonymous Twitter accounts so that you can use those accounts to harass people without personal consequences for it. But really, I think there are a lot of legitimate reasons to not tweet under your own name, or to not feature your identity along with your social media. I think that's completely fine too. Again, it really has to do with what you want to use the platform for and what you're comfortable with personally.
Right. Nikki or Chris, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can just kind of speak to some examples that I've seen with some of the researchers that we have. There are lots that post under their own personal name, but also you also have labs and bodies of work, and sometimes that's a good way to position your Twitter accounts. And you can have both. You can have that personal account to kind of follow for your personal lives as well, but sometimes the body of work itself justifies being able to have an account that you can share that work, and it's still remaining transparent because it's connected to your lab or your program of research, but it's just another way to maybe put the work at the forefront, and that way it can be sort of a collaborative approach to share the things that are happening with you and your team. So that's another approach, but again, agree very much on making sure that it's transparent so that it's not an anonymous thing, but maybe putting that work at the forefront versus your own personal self.
Chris, any thoughts?
Those were both excellent answers, and it's covered pretty much anything I would want to say. Aside from maybe I've seen a few researchers use it to, not push their own work, but just kind of create community. A lot of what they do is they go out there, you talk to people, whether it's funders or just people who live in a certain community. And, it's really great way to kind of keep up those conversations that are maybe a little bit aside from your work. So that's maybe one of the benefits of why you would want to use your own name.
Yeah, I think that it's always been, this again comes from the journalism world, but there's a high bar for granting anonymity to someone, because there is power in putting your own name behind something that you're saying. And I think especially when you're talking about promoting your work and your story, it adds credibility to have that identity named. But there are reasons for safety and other reasons to that are absolutely valid for not. And in terms of how you pick your name, I don't know. I would just recommend not getting too cute about it. I got stuck with a too cute name off the top in Twitter, and I started all over when I came to USask just to kind of get rid of that HP of Toontown, not the most professional handle. So I can speak from experience to say that even my real identity was picked, but you want something that's going to speak to what you're doing. Like SP editor probably would have been a much better choice for me regarding that. So I can speak from experience in that way.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I would suggest though for that is that if you are, I wouldn't recommend that people include their employer's name in their handle. Like, I'm not going to be like VIDO Angie now, because even though it says in my bio that I work for VIDO, and I'll try to get USask in there. The Twitter bios are character limited. You know, even though it says that, and I'm upfront about who I am and where I work, I think that, you know, probably most employers, if you're not tweeting on their behalf, would frown on that. So, you know, if you do try to pick something that's not just your name and that's descriptive of you and who you are, I'd say try to keep other institutions and other people's names out of your Twitter handle or your Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn.
Great advice. That's terrific. I also should mention that I see a lot of people put my opinions are my own at the, you know, with their social. That's great to do as a framing mechanism, but it's not going to, you know, not create relationship issues if you're creating relationship issues. So I think, I'm not sure if the panelists agree with me, but I think if you have a personal account, people assume it's going to be your own opinion, but that little moniker at the top doesn't stop issues if they arise.
Yeah, agreed. I think that it goes without saying that your personal Twitter account is your personal views, but that doesn't change the fact that you will run afoul of your employer if you start saying things that aren't true, if you start engaging in abusive or just bad conduct in general on social media. I think that, you know, most employers, again, won't be like, oh, no problem, if you just say, these are my own opinions. Yeah, totally agree.
That's great. So we're running out of time. I don't see any more questions right now, but one question that I've been getting a lot in this new role is from people that are not engaged in social media at all. And I'm just wondering if the panel has any advice on why they should dip their toe in, and maybe even some ideas of how do you start to engage? Because the sense I get is that it seems overwhelming and kind of scary. Nikki, maybe do you want to start this one?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. And I do see one other question there, Heather, that we can address after. Yeah, so I would say it is overwhelming, but kind of like I mentioned before, think of it as any type of communication with any person you're building that relationship with. But the other thing to look at is there's a lot of social channels you could be on, but you can't necessarily be on all of them and do well on all of them. So you want to look at what your objectives are, where your audience is, and then kind of match that to what your resources are. It takes a lot of time. So maybe just dip your toe in with one account on one platform. Look at where best will meet your objectives and target your audience. Start there, start slow, and just try different things. Try posting different times, try posting different types of content. You'll get a groove and you'll find what's working. It's immediate feedback. You see how your posts are doing right away. So I would look at your resources, start there, and just really keep your audience centered at why you're doing this.
Great. Do other panelists have anything to add to that?
I totally agree with everything Nikki just said. I think that really the best way is to just kind of figure out which platform works for you and which is going to work for what you want to get out of it. Not everybody, you know, I have an Instagram account that's completely private because I use that to share vacation photos with my family and friends. I don't use that for public facing communication. You know, so there's different platforms with different uses for them, and everybody will have their own use. I think that really, as Nikki said, just giving it a try and figuring out how you can cultivate these relationships with others in these social media networks. You'll figure out what's going to be the best one for you and what's going to be the best approach.
Great.
Yeah, those are both great answers. And just to add something really quickly, you know, also a big part about social media is, you know, maybe listening as well, you know, cultivating those people that you want to follow, because every platform kind of has its own sort of rock stars and, you know, people who you'll generally you'd like to share their content as well. So, you know, a lot of it's listening and seeing what other people are doing and, you know, learning from what they do. So.
Great. Sorry, I missed this question, but the question is, can you speak to using social media for research study recruitment? So I'm not sure, Nikki, maybe, or Dr. Rasmussen, if you could address that.
That might actually be a better question for Nikki, just because I don't really do very many studies
Sure.
with human participants, but I know that there's a lot of paperwork involved.
Yeah, I've had this question a lot before as well, and I think it's a good place to create that awareness. So there may be some follow-up steps that happen after the fact, but and we kind of talked about it a bit too, of building that community. A lot of what you're trying to do, especially in the health research realm, is reach specific communities or potentially patient groups, things like that. A lot of them have their communities already built on social media. So it is a really good way to kind of get that attention to your study and use it for recruitment that way, maybe just to plant the seeds where and provide follow-up where they can find more information. I think that's really key, because if you can find those audiences online that are public facing already and having those conversations, you can bring attention to that and then follow up with more information, because it may not be appropriate to directly target them that way, but social media is just such a great tool to raise that awareness, and that's kind of your first step in building that relationship with those groups. So that would be my suggestion.
That's great. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time and the end of our questions, and I'm just so grateful for this time together. I know one of the first things about communication, the tenets of it, is that you meet people where they live, and people live right here now. So to meet people and find audience and to reach out, really, we need to be working social media and using that as a tool. And I think we're all better prepared for that after today. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you for those who joined us today. There are plans to put together some resources based on the question and that kind of thing that will be sent out. So we're going to follow up, and we'll also send a link maybe to the recording in case you want to send it to someone who might need this information. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody, for having me.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.